Welcome to the Adulting Demystified podcast with your host, Odelia Goldberg. In each episode, we'll have subject matter experts discuss things that most people don't know, but probably should. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, ogoldberglaw.com. Now, here's the host of Adulting Demystified, Odelia Goldberg.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Adulting Demystified. And today we're lucky enough to have with us Maureen Mascaro, who is an owner's rep, which to me sounds like a project manager for building and commercial developments and things like that. And I'm so excited to speak with you, Maureen, because this to me is kind of like something that most people probably don't experience having a conversation about. And the whole purpose of this podcast is to take subject matter experts and have them kind of demystify these common misconceptions that are out there that are prevalent. You know, I'm an estate planning lawyer, so I spend most of my day talking about what a will does and doesn't do, and what probate is and isn't, and how we avoid probate and things like that. And I figured, I bet in every subject matter, we have these functional silos where people know stuff, but everyone else kind of doesn't. So wouldn't it be great if we had a forum where people could talk and kind of demystify some of these common misconceptions? So I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I think it's a brilliant concept, and I certainly some days question whether I'm an adult or not. And so some of these lessons give me a little vote of confidence that maybe I'm on the right track.
For sure. So, Maureen, I'm sure I didn't do it justice. Why don't you tell us exactly what it is that you do?
Sure. So the common area, my core business is basically provides owner's representation and project management services. And a simple way to explain it is I'm the conductor of the orchestra for any type of real estate project. So primarily we focus on a couple sectors, commercial interior office fit outs. We do high-end residential, either ground up new homes or renovations to existing homes. And then we have a third sector, which is sort of the commercial ground up development, which could be multifamily, retail, restaurant, those sorts of things. We do also tap into medical, industrial, education, basically anything except for the big giant high-rise buildings. We will get involved and help our clients navigate the entire process from concept to completion.
Wow, amazing. And so I guess we could just jump right in. What's a big common misconception that people get wrong about what it is that you do?
That they don't need us. I think most people don't even know that our services exist at all. And they think that their general contractor or their architect is going to shepherd them through and advocate and advise them from all facets of the project. And the reality is that your architect is really going to focus on the design of the project, and your GC is going to focus on building it. But there's so much that goes into it that unless you've done it before repeatedly, you're going to make mistakes along the way. And those mistakes can be very expensive and cause immense delays. But on top of that, add immense pressure and stress that is all avoidable. So the biggest misconception is that they don't need us. And then when they find out they need us, it's often a little late for us to be coming in. So bring us in early and help us set up success for your project from the very beginning.
And I suspect that the rework and the costs associated with correcting some of those oversights would far exceed how much it would really cost to hire because I'm PMI certified. Back in my IBM days, I took the PMI and I'm a project manager. I actually have a George Washington certificate from George Washington University of Project Management. So you are speaking my language. When my boyfriend said, I want to redo my kitchen, I'm like, oh, let's get the budget going and let's get our timeline going and let's get our tasks detailed. And he's like, what are you talking about? So I jumped into project management mode all the time without even knowing it, because it's kind of built into my nature. But for sure, I think that there's overlap between what you do and what a designer would do, for example. Is there some kind of overlap, or are designers a totally separate field?
It really is a totally separate field. However, we do a lot of collaboration. So a lot of the like the owner's rep job description or the career path is often fallen into by recovering designers and recovering or recovering lawyers who want to get back into project management for sure. So if this career doesn't work out for you, you've got another one in line. But it's essentially, I'll give you a perfect example. We have a client now, a residential client, whose interior designer and architect did not specify all of the plumbing fixtures that are going to go into a, 6-bedroom home, 6-bedroom, 7-bathroom home. And it just wasn't in their scope. And Kimberly on my team is actually an interior designer and architect by background, even though she's an owner's rep project manager now. So she had the skill set, knowledge, and capability to do it. And because we're a boutique firm, sometimes we'll step up to the plate and do some of these tasks that really shouldn't fall on our shoulders. But for the sake of the project and moving it forward, we can do some of those things, but we absolutely do not sell it as a service or really charge for it. It's just one of those like bonus things. The other thing that we do is a peer review of the drawings. We have somebody on the team who is a very well-trained architect who goes through each and every drawing to make sure that the architectural sheets match everything that's on the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural, civil sheets, so that we have less conflict in the field later on that gets uncovered in the act of construction. So we do a peer review of drawings, but again, we're not designers and we're not responsible for any code requirements that go into drawings or anything of that nature. We also have a lot of experience knowing how materials work and how constructability concerns come up. And when we're in the field acting on, on behalf of our clients, visiting the job site every week, we're looking for quality and we're looking for, is this working and what are the conflicts in the field that the GC is contending with? And can we give some advice and guidance on how to do this maybe a little differently that we've seen done in the past? So there is a lot of overlap, and I really live and breathe by the mantra of we collaborate as a team, us, the client, the architect, the GC, everybody on the team has things to contribute towards the success of the project. And we don't, often I'll say, I'm not a designer, and so don't trust me on paint color pickouts, but I do know a thing or two about this. And so here's my opinion or here's my thoughts, but take it with a grain of salt and let's go through the process of investigating whether there's other solutions or other things. So yes, I hope that answers it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I bet everything that you do kind of makes it easier for the permitting process, which is obviously a major point of contention in the building department, because the more you do the work up front and get it right the first time, the less rework for the permitting and, for the city's involvement. It makes it easier for them.
Yes, everything that you just said is completely accurate. I think that we're in the South Florida market in particular, but we do projects in Texas, Georgia, New York, the Bahamas, everywhere.
Really?
And they all have, they do there's a wide variety of code requirements in every jurisdiction. So one of our roles is to make sure that your architect and engineering teams is very familiar with the market that you're building in. Sometimes clients bring outside markets into South Florida, for example, and we have one of the strictest code books in the country. And so another thing that happens is that sometimes design teams at the insistence of the client maybe rush through their drawings and don't have all the details listed. And so they may get into permit routing and haven't done a quality control check and don't have all the details. So we get a ton of comments that we then have to spend time to address. Right. And then there's a re-review, and then there could be a second round of comments, and then a re-review and a third round of comments. And every single time we come out of the city and go back into the city, comments are either coming out trade by trade, and then it's our job to help make sure that our design teams are paying attention to those and responding or preparing their response in a timely manner, so that, as soon as we get that last response, we're pretty much ready to turn in our revisions pretty quickly. Our job also during that time frame is to advise the client on if any of those permit comments are going to affect the budget or the schedule or create a conflict in the design that has to be changed, that we're letting them know. We're not acting in a silo, that they're prepared for, the city came back with a comment that said you have to add a grease trap because you have a dishwasher, right? Or a kitchen. And if the client isn't told that, we may go ahead and add a grease trap to the tune of $20,000, $30,000, rather than just ask the question, do you really need a dishwasher? Maybe you can just do plasticware or hire a cleaning staff. So it's those kind of smart watches on the comments that are coming out and advising the client along the way.
What is your, I guess, project scope where it makes sense for you to get involved? Is there a project that's too big, a project that's too small, a project that's on the water that may not be a good fit? Where is your kind of comfort zone with the particular projects you take on?
Yeah, so we have a team of 12 now. And so what, I heard the advice when I first started my company to always hire people that are smarter than you. And so I've tried to do that. I think everyone on the team has a different skill set and ability and brings something different to the table. So when I first started the company in 2018, my core scope of work or my core project type was an interior office fit out. That was my wheelhouse. I knew that like the back of my hand. And as a solopreneur, that was the clientele I took on. And then for every single team member that I added, they were bringing different experiences to the table. And so now we do ground up construction, we do retail and restaurant, we do all these residential projects, very high-end residential single family homes. We work with seawall, projects that have seawalls that are on the water. And so in terms of the smallest project, like we'll do a 2,000 square foot renovation for a small retail shop just as easily as we'll do a 200,000 square foot build out for an industrial and office client. So it really doesn't matter in terms of the high rise buildings. We don't really get into that, but we'll do mid rise, 8 stories, 12 stories, 15 stories. We have a couple in entitlements and zoning approvals right now. But we also just do standalone move management services where we're just managing the client's relocation from their current location to a new move-in ready office space they might have leased. So it really is not, we're not limited. Another thing we do is we do bank loan monitoring or pay app reviews if there is no loan involved, where all we're doing is a job site visit once a month. We review the pay application, all the lien releases, all of the backup documentation, and we alert the client if there's any red flags, or we tell the GC that you need to revise and resubmit because you're overbilling on this category. So those are the types of things that we can do as one-off services, or we can do our whole gamut of full services.
And who usually hires you? Who brings your skill set in? Would it be the contractor? Would it be the customer? Who's the one that kind of is like, who we need here? A project manager.
Yeah, it's usually the person who signs my contract is the occupier of the space, whether that is going to be the office occupant, like a law firm or a retail shop or a restaurant owner. On the development side, like that 15-story development, the developer is not going to live in that multifamily property. So the developer hired us, but he's the owner of the project. So that's where that owner representative comes from. Whoever is paying all the bills on the project is typically who hires us. And absolutely, we save them more than we cost them by the ways that we save projects. The other thing I'll say is in terms of who refers, most of my business is referral business. Knock on wood, that's like the best place to be. And most of the referrals either come from current or past clients, or the architect, the GC, or other team members that have interacted with us in the past and have seen the value that we bring and how much easier we make their jobs and how much smoother the projects run when you have an owner's rep involved. So when they start to sense that they're being involved in a project that looks a little messy, they kind of say, oh, you should call Maureen. It looks like you really need a little extra support. And so and brokers, real estate brokers are also a good source of leads for us, prospects.
That's amazing. I know this might be a hard question to answer, but what percentages of projects have an owner's rep and what percentages don't? Because it's just not something people talk about, I think.
Yes. My top competitor in the market is people that just simply don't know that the service exists and they try to self-manage it. So a lot of office build outs will have their office manager try to manage the build out or their HR director or their chief operating officer. And I would say the vast majority of projects, like maybe 60% of them, 75% don't have an owner's rep, and they really should. And then the rest do, and they're glad they do. And they would never do a project without one.
Right. I feel like it makes a lot of sense to me, especially with construction when there's so much unknown. When I worked in technology with IBM, and I think I've said this before on this podcast, we kind of knew that we didn't know what we were doing. So when we would go out and the sales team would sell something like a time machine, and then they'd come back to us delivery and be like, all right, you got to deliver this. We'd be like, well, they would sell it saying this might be $100,000 plus or minus 2 times. And they would say it's going to take us 6 months plus or minus 2 times, because we knew we didn't know what we were doing. And it was kind of understood in the industry that this was a ballpark. We're kind of shooting at the stars, back in the day, and when the internet was young, and we really were trying to kind of create the tools to create the internet to support everything. But with construction, I feel like when people give a quote for even like a bathroom or kitchen, the customer wants to hold that contractor to that. And it's so difficult for the contractor because you don't know what's behind that wall. You don't know what's going on, what the pipes are looking like, or, what the labor is going to be in 4 months, or, what any of these unknowns are. And the industry hasn't caught up with their, the idea that they really just don't know. And it's okay not to know, as long as everybody understands that we don't know. But it's kind of a different world, I feel like.
Yes. And especially in the South Florida market, there are a lot of contractors who are not putting together detailed quotes that explain through their exclusions and clarifications pages what the assumptions are that went into making it. And they may just give like a 1-page quote for a kitchen renovation. Let's say here's $60,000 for a kitchen renovation, but spoken like someone who's been through this before, you never know what's behind those walls. And so you could really open it up and see termite damage everywhere, or find asbestos, or there's cast iron piping from an old home that's just falling apart. All sorts of environmental issues, mold and things could be happening. But also, if you haven't specified all of your materials and your equipment that is going into the project, by the time you define that later, that can also really skew the cost assumptions on the project, as well as the timeline. So it's really important that you organize as much information going into the project as possible and spoon feed it to the contractor, and then expect them in return to give you a very detailed breakdown of cost per division, materials and labor, general conditions, overhead, profit, insurance. All the costs should be broken out in as much detail as possible. Sometimes you'll find that depending on the size of the project, the GCs you're not going to need a super sophisticated GC to do something. And so they're going to balk at this idea that they need to provide all this extra documentation, like a schedule. Well, okay, that's fine if you can agree to that, but then you're going to open yourself up to a lot of risk. So it's very important to know going into it that you are taking on a very risky project without the contractual background documents that you could feel more safe with if you had them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the more information, the better, because obviously the more prepared people are, the more aware they are, the better decisions people could make. And I just feel like the industry as a whole kind of, it's an interesting industry when you think about it, how it kind of hasn't evolved in an understanding that there's a lot of unknowns. And, when I review contracts all day long, I review new construction contracts a lot. And I always tell my clients, yeah, the contract looks good. Honestly, what you're getting into is the relationship with the builder. So let's research the builder. Let's see what their projects have looked like. Let's see what their, litigation history is, that sort of thing. But beyond that, I say you also have to be prepared to pay at least half the amount in addition to, and it's going to take time and a half, because that's how construction is. If you're okay with spending a lot more than what this contract says and it taking a lot longer, then yeah, the contract looks fine. These are some of the issues, but most people are kind of sticklers for the facts in there, and the contractors that, at least on an industry wide, haven't done a great job overall of educating the humans that construction is just that. It's a little bit of a risk and an unknown. So you might get someone that tells you, yeah, for sure, 3 months at this price, but who's to say they're actually going to meet that?
Right. One of the first things we do is build a common sense budget for our client. And that includes all your hard costs, which is your cost of the construction, your soft costs, which is all your consultants, like your architect, your engineers, your permitting fees, and then all of your FF&E, which is your furniture, fixture, and equipment. And so that includes IT, AV, signage, plants, art, all the things that could go into a project. We build out a budget that makes assumptions, and then it's a conversation starter with the client. And it's almost like going out to dinner. If you can't afford the tip, you can't afford the steak. So you need to order something. We build a contingency into that budget. In the beginning of the project, my budget will have usually a 20% or a 25% contingency packed in. And then as we move through the design stages in the project, I'll tighten that down, ultimately landing around 10%. And that's the client's private contingency in their back pocket, because we all know that our clients are going to change their minds on things and need changes mid-project. And so that's their fund to deploy for those things. And then also their fund to deploy if things go wrong and there are change orders that are just have to be paid for. And so that's important. And then there's other contractual tools that we can negotiate depending on the size of the project, like liquidated damages to make sure that we're holding a GC accountable to a schedule, early completion performance bonuses. There's also cost plus open book, where we get to see all the receipts for everything with a GMP, a maximum price for that contract. So the other format that most people are used to seeing is just a lump sum. Here, I'm going to do this for $200,000 and sign on the dotted line and I'll get started. And we see less and less of that and more of the cost plus approach, so that we have open book transparency in that process. And that stems from just wanting a trustful dynamic with our GC. That does put a little bit more risk on the owner of the project, because it's straight cost plus the added fee, versus a lump sum where if the GC didn't quite price it right, they might have to eat some expenses. Ultimately, the GC is never going to eat the expenses. It's always going to fall on the client.
Not in the contracts they draft.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing. We always review these contracts from an owner's rep perspective for practicality. But then we also partner with a attorney to review that knows construction law. So it's good to know that you do that, because then I can start kind of referring you to some of those clients. Sure. But we really rely heavily on our attorneys on the project to really give level set advice to the client so that they hear it clearly what their risks are.
Absolutely. So I heard you say that you do projects all over. I'm curious to see if there's any difference in the South Florida market versus if you notice, trends or behaviors in humans as you go from area to area. I always like that discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my favorite examples of a difference in culture in project locations is we did a project for Crossville Ceramics in Miami that was a showroom and warehouse. And then we had such a great project and experience with them that they asked us to be involved in their project in Loudon, Tennessee, which is like in the middle of nowhere. And it was a huge, 120, 140,000 square foot warehouse with a small office component. And so in the Miami market, we were dealing with really heavy-handed jurisdictional oversight from the permitting office. And we got started on some early demo because we thought we had permission to do so from everybody that we needed to. But it turns out that the city was actually not fully approved on that and cited us. Luckily, they waived the fee and gave a slap on the wrist. But there was a lot of scary times there where we were doing something that we weren't allowed to do. Meanwhile, in Loudon, Tennessee, we had a 2-page drawing that went in the permitting office, and we were through in like a week and a half from their permitting office. And then I think we maybe had 3 inspections on the project total. And they just left us alone the whole time, and the jurisdiction didn't have that much oversight. The other thing is that the landlord in Miami was really like difficult to deal with in some ways. But the landlord in Loudon, Tennessee, with that Southern hospitality spirit, was just like very easygoing and helpful about everything, and really willing to put in whatever it took to help the client get things done. So there can be cultural differences too. Another big surprise for Crossville was the cost of construction in Miami, because they had done projects across the US and other locations, and they weren't seeing near as high of a price of construction. But we have, limited of skilled labor here in the South Florida market, especially for craftsmen that are doing millwork or tile work or things of that nature. And carpentry, absolutely. So there was a big difference in expectations there.
Wow, how interesting. Well, I want to just give you an opportunity to let us know what other items do you find people kind of get wrong about your profession? If there's anything else, you kind of scream from the rooftop and let the humans know this is the forum.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that we are going to stop every mistake from happening. That's not fully our job. We'll stop 90% of the potential mistakes, but construction is very complicated, especially if you have an existing building or other complications on the project. And there are going to be, things that come out of nowhere that knock us to our feet that we have to get up and deal with as a team and overcome. And that's totally normal. And I think some people, when they hire us initially, they're like, this is brilliant. No mistakes would be made. And if any mistakes are made, it's all your fault, because that's why we hired you. And it's like, well, not exactly. The other thing is people expect there to be no change orders at all if they hire us. And it's like, change order should not be a dirty word, right? We have to get over this idea, because there will be change orders. Sure. Some of them are going to be your fault. And I'm not afraid to tell you that this one came out because of you. But there are going to be reasons that are valid, that are really, truly valid, that become change orders. And you have to be, like you said, willing to roll with those punches and expect it. So we're not a savior and a cure-all for everything.
You're not magic.
We're not magic. We're still dealing with humans building with bricks and sticks. So, understand that we're not robots, and humans, we always, will make mistakes, but it's about the attitude of how you overcome those as a team. And I like to say that as long as we can have the most challenging project ever, but if all of us, architect, GC, client, you name it, everyone on the team can shake hands at the end of the project and say, wow, I'm so glad that we did this together. Let's do another one. That's the sign of a successful project. Sure. Relationships remain intact. You use those relationships to navigate all the struggles you deal with. And then you come out of it, and the energy in that building or office or home that went into building it stays there for that occupant that's going to occupy it. And that's really special to me.
Yeah. And you guys still want to work together. You didn't upset each other to the point where nobody wants to deal with the other person after. Yeah, that's
exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Maureen, thank you so much for sharing what you do with us. I learned a lot. I didn't even know. I think I did know that your profession existed, because now that I think back, I've reviewed quite a few we call them project management contracts. So I've reviewed quite a bit of them throughout my years. And I was always like, oh, how interesting, and I didn't sit down with it long enough to be like, oh, this is like a whole industry, a whole profession, and it's necessary and critical, and it saves energy, and a little bit of time and planning now saves a lot of time and energy later. So I'm glad you kind of brought that to the frontal parts of my brain.
Yeah, yes, and hopefully any listeners out there who would want to consider this as a career path, definitely I would love to talk to them, because not enough people understand that this career path can be a really, really beautiful way of life, and a thing to do with your intelligence and your abilities, and if you're type A like me, and you like to manage things, and you like to interact with people, and you have good soft skills, and you can negotiate conflict well, then I can teach you about construction, right? Like, you don't have to know everything about construction to do this. You have to be teachable, and you have to have those soft skills. That's the most important part.
Well, I love that. Good luck to you.
Thank you. And thank you for your time. And I look forward to listening to all your podcasts.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
You've been tuning in to the Adulting Demystified podcast with your host, Odelia Goldberg. You should never get legal advice from a podcast. Please don't do anything stupid and ruin it for the rest of us. You deserve to have your own legal advice from a legal professional. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, ogoldberglaw.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.